Welcome everyone to the next instance of the SUSE QE Tools Workshop. Today the topic will be openQA tests written in Python. We do have experimental support for writing openQA tests in Python, and I would like to show you how that can look like and how that can be used in practice. It's experimental, so it has some caveats, yet some rough points that we would need to rule out before it's really streamlined. But anyway, so I'm starting, what you can see here is Gitpod. And Gitpod offers container-based, web-based development environment and also a shell. And what you can see here is that I have checked out the GitHub-based distribution of the openQA and openQA tests. I also have prepared in there a bit more. I have prepared a definition file for GitHub Actions. And what this does is, with curl, triggers new openQA jobs based on the state of Git, which is included in this repository, and some additional settings, for example, a name, then pointing to the current Git repository, loading an HDD image where we have openQA installed on Tumbleweed, and a schedule. And in the schedule, I'm loading one test module where commonly you're used to load Perl modules, Perl openQA test modules, which looks something like this. And instead here, what we can do is we can also load a Python module, which can look something like this. So, how to start? Basically, you start by creating an openQA test module. So if you have a test distribution, let's say based on an also industry example, you can create a Python file. Test API is already offered as a standard Python module within OS/Autoinst. You can import individual methods, or you can import all. Then you define a run method, and then you can use normal Python, test API calls. And I already triggered one run. We can also trigger more run afterwards. I just wanted to do that in before because maybe it takes a minute to boot or something. So what I did is I pushed that to GitHub, and this is the GitHub CI action that is triggering an action, which we can see here. There's one job which took 6 seconds. It says trigger openQA test. Basically, you end up with one ID. And that ID, I don't use the ID because there's also another feature which I learned that some people don't know. So I wanted to remind that there's a route called test latest, and then you can specify query parameter, which in that case, for example, I'm just matching my test here. Actually, I can show you that if I just do, latest like this, then it's loading the latest test. So latest question mark test equals your test name or any additional optional parameters, and then you end up with the latest test.
And I think this is not currently exposed in the web API, right? This is only if you know how to prepare the URL.
It's actually exposed in a way that if you follow the link to latest here, then it's using that format, and no, it doesn't explain here. So yeah, you would need to click that link, and based on that, normally you don't need to adjust anything, but if you like, then you can customize the URL. If anyone has a good idea where we could put that, I think it is mentioned in the documentation also, I'm not sure about that, but if you have a good idea how we could make that more prominent in the UI, then yeah, I would appreciate it. Now I'm just showing you the results, and then afterwards we can discuss and try out something more. Now we can see that this is the same Python test module. And well, yeah, it's looking for boot menu or open the desktop, and afterwards it actually fails because the test code is assuming that there's openQA desktop, but actually we would need to log in. So we would need to change the test code. If you like, then we can do that interactively. But first, let's see. Anton.
Yeah, I have a question. So regarding this wrapping of test API, maybe you can in few words explain how it's actually done. I mean, to better understand, like if is there like some generator which generates this Python version or some binding? So yeah, just internals, how it's done, this wrapping.
Yeah. Let's see. I think I should be able to find that here. Rodion, I'm sorry, I can't zoom in and more in this Gitpod editor, but maybe I can change the font size.
Usually it's Control plus. Okay, try it. It's
Yeah.
working
Well,
most of
that's a bit
80%.
bigger now. Yeah. Let's see. No, I can't do that here, but yeah. So here I have a checkout of author audience, and in there there is a file called testapi.py, and that's rather simple. What it does, it's importing a special module in Python, which is called Perl. And with Perl, we can import Perl modules into the Python scope. And what I'm doing here is dynamically generating a Python function which delegates to the Perl test API function.
And currently it's done only for test IPPM, right?
Correct. Currently, that's done only for test API, because this is what testers should use. And all the calls which you call from there, like select, console, or third screen, type string, and so on, should work. If you want to use a bit more low-level code, what you could do is actually just use that in the test module itself.
Okay, thank you.
Right, so what else? Questions, ideas? What should we do?
Limitations, you mentioned some caveats.
Yeah, the caveat is that, for example, if you have a problem, I can show you here in the last incomplete job, and here I can zoom. The error reporting is not good enough. It says here that there was Python exception, and you don't see the actual error from Python context. For example, if you have a trivial syntax error, then you can't see that here. So it should say, if you run ISO2Video locally, then it should say something like wrong syntax, and then with the arrow it's pointing you to where the comma is missing or something. So this is a bit tricky. If it works, then it does work. But if it doesn't work, then trying to understand what the problem is a bit hard. Another thing which I tried is I tried to run it in this Gitpod session. Why? Because Gitpod is, you know, not my local session. So if it works on my workstation, that doesn't help you much. But here, then I failed to install the Inline Python module. It also fails to install netdbus, which might be specific to this Ubuntu environment again. But then, you know, so it's this Perl Python modules is maybe also not that straightforward, and not that, doesn't look like it's offering that much. So if it doesn't work, then you're also a bit on your own. I'm sure we can rule that out because it's actually also not that complicated. So yeah.
Ollie, hi. Just a related question. What happens if you raise the exception in the Python code? Will you get more or less the same output, or?
What is actually done is that we do raise an exception from Python code, which is caught in Perl as a standard exception. So it looks a bit similar, but basically it provides the very same context that you normally get if you have let's say a failed assert screen. The same as a syntax error is then handled accordingly, so that in the openQA output you see what you're used to from Perl modules. This is why, for example, here when it says test died no candidate needle, that, you know, it was actually on the lowest level, it was Perl code which was going through Python, and then Python was raising that as a Python exception, which was again caught by Perl. So on the highest level, then it looks the same. Let's see if we see any difference here, but yeah. So here it really doesn't look different because, you know, you basically have the very same failure message. Right. I can also show you how ISO2Video in another environment looks like. So let me show you here. To restart it. I lost. Refused. I'm not able to log into O3 right now. Oh, yeah. Sorry, I can't show you right now how the now it works. Okay. 7. So I'm starting ISO2Video locally, and what you see is here it's starting the Python test module, and then it's just going into a standard assert screen. And if I change that code now to be invalid, use a syntax error. For example, let's forget the opening parenthesis here. Then it looks like this. Yeah, so we have the same underlying error message that we also saw in the WebUI log, but this part is somehow missing. Even though here it's pretty clear. It says invalid syntax, you have this closing parenthesis, and then you need to realize, oh yeah, I forgot that opening brace, right?
Could this be related to log levels? Like, do you have any debug settings enabled that we wouldn't have in production?
We always output the debug log level and everything
Yeah.
below that, so it's not the same. It's, you know, it's a standard output, standard error problem. I thought that with ISO2 video we would catch all that, but Chris, as you remember, you and Marius and me, we have seen that already in before when
Yeah.
when I pulled you in for one development session. Yeah, but I'm confident that we can solve the problem as well.
Is it using Python 2 or 3 or?
Good that you mentioned that. So it is using Python 3, but by default internally in the model, it still tries to use Python 2. This is also why this has caused a problem in OS Audience Distry openSUSE. There we have this line here where we need to set the inline Python executable to Python 3 variant so that this Perl inline Python module is using the correct version of Python. Yeah, this Python 2 version Python 3 is fun. Anton?
Do you treat this use of Python 2 as a bug or as a feature?
It just shows that the Perl module doesn't receive much up or any updates in that regard. I mean, it is supported to change the Python executable, so knowing that is not a problem. Basically, I would say it's a distribution decision. If openSUSE decides that Python 3 is the default Python interpreter, then they need to ensure that the Python module works accordingly, which it does. It's just that what we do here is that we set up the Perl environment based on a CPON file. So I would say everything works as expected from the levels of the upstream module as well as Python as well as Perl, but really, yeah, I mean, this just needed to be fixed in OS Audience Distry openSUSE. That's what I would say. Okay. Who's next? Alex.
Yeah, hi Oliver. Sorry, I missed start like introduction in the start, and maybe you mentioned this, and I'm sorry.
I'm happy to say again.
Yeah, yeah. Do we plan to kind of move completely to Python in some future, or it's just like additional thing to Perl?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would recommend to use that Python support for new test distributions. I would not recommend to replace any existing users. And that means...
But what advantages do we have except that it's Python?
Well, the one advantage is that whoever is scared of Perl, even though our Perl is actually rather simple, right? Can try it out in Python. So, you know, the advantage would be for openQA, not for you as experts, but for beginners that they might have another entry vector. The second advantage might be if there are certain supporting modules or libraries which are only available in Python, then that could be a way to go. By the way, this approach of bringing in Python support, you can also see as kind of a precursor for the possibility to also support potential other languages. There is Perl module called Inline, which allows to write Perl subroutines in other programming languages. And it shows as an example C code. So what you can do here is within Perl code, you can write C code. Or in our case, use Perl Inline Python, which is kind of a plugin for that inline module, use Python code. The interesting thing might be that this test module looks like it's only Python, right? It only has this .py, so this is only Python code. But for all test modules, this is the same for Perl modules as well as for Python. Aus AutoInst dynamically includes the source code and generates Perl code on the fly. So what we do anyway when we call load test on any test module is that we have some wrapping code around that, and we either detect it as a as a Perl module, so then we put some wrapping code around the Perl module so that it can find all the necessary modules and stuff, or we detect a Python module and then we just add one more line to say like, yeah, okay, use inline Python, and then the code from here is generated into a dynamic Perl module. And the same could be done for JavaScript, C, Rust, whatever. Next raised hand was by Phoenix.
Okay. Ollie, I really like this, and if I look at the simplicity of the module that you have open now, I'm wondering if in the future there will be a possibility to run the test codes also locally, so that when you write a test, you don't need to submit it to openQA and wait for the huge overhead of setting up a test, spinning up the machine, etc. But if there will be if there is a possibility to run something like a simple console test in a local container test environment whatsoever, and you can cut the resulting overhead of running it in openQA itself.
This was and is always possible already. I just showed you in the terminal in before where I ran ISO to video outside openQA. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
So I know that many people don't do that. I strongly recommend that everyone that works on a daily base or on a regular base with openQA should know that and should be able to do that, because it can save so much time. Of course, it's much more convenient if you just want to update a single needle to use the openQA web interface. But if you're trying to follow a logic, or as you mentioned, just a text-based test, then that should be used, especially if it's as simple as you just want to get the syntax right. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
We can try it in this environment. I don't know if that worked, but let's see. My PC system simple. Maybe I need to go in this environment. So I have ISO to video, which in that case I have built locally, but if you have the system installed version, that also works. And we pointed, you can either use a vars JSON file if you have an existing job and you want to reproduce it. Download the vars JSON file and just run ISO to video in the same directory where you have the vars JSON file, and ISO to video will either work or it will tell you where it needs different parameters. One example would be if you download it from a worker, then some paths might be different. For example, it would tell you cannot find ISO file in pool/1/ISO something. Then you can overwrite the paths here on the command line. For example, you could say ISO like this. Or in that case, I want to run ISO to video without any bar.station file, so I need to specify all necessary parameters. Basically, the only single parameter that I need for start is the case dir to tell where to load test from.
Only I can't see this because the stupid Jitsi buttons are right in the terminal.
I see. Sorry, I
And I
understand.
also have no idea how to solve this. Yeah, perfect.
I can help you with that. I thought I could help you with that.
Can you try moving the mouse?
The thing is...
No, I mean, yeah, I think Chris wanted to say that Felix, if he will move out the mouse from the Jitsi window, this stupid Jitsi control will fly away.
Well,
Yeah.
for me they remain, but never mind.
Close the chat window.
A few times, then it moves up.
I did this. It behaves interesting. Like now it works. Control L. Right. So it's missing IPC system simple.
But correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Felix, what was wanted to say is like if you can open a Python interpreter and put from test API import and do it in the active mode.
That would be the next step, but already this one is kind of useful.
So yeah, so I'm starting ISO the video, and it says can't init needles. So I say, okay, where are my needles? Good point. I don't actually have needles yet. But I don't care about the needles, so I will just create an empty needles there. Like this. Then can't locate net debus. Yeah, that was the problem. So we need net debus, and that somehow I could not install here. Doesn't work. But no problem. Then I can go back to the other window. Fallback is here. So, yeah, basically there you have it. So I start ISO to video. I tell it where to find the tests, and I provide a needle steer, and I overwrite the schedule because I only want to load that specific needle. So I can recommend, I mean, I really like console tools because for their efficiency and for having a history available of commands. So what I commonly do is I have two terminals open, be it like in a screen session, tmarks, or just two X terminals. And in one, I have my editor with Vim, and in the other window, I have that running with a tool which is called iNotify_wait. And with iNotify_wait, this just automatically triggers this run whenever any files in the local Git repository or in the local directory change. And this is the fastest turnaround. If you like, there are also other backends available. So if you really want to say, I want to check the most basics, most low-level things, there's also a null backend. It doesn't bring you far, but as you can see, something like checking the syntax is possible with a null backend, so we don't even need to load QEMU or anything. Okay. Did I use Swim? Yeah.
Although I'd suggest there's an even faster way to do that. If you run Flake 8, for instance.
Yeah, right. I mean, for Python code, we could check the syntax that way, and of course, for Perl, we have the Perl test compiler available. So yeah, you can see that even with the null backend, it starts, but here it hangs because the backend, it never returns anything for this assert screen. So limited use case, we use it for internal testing, but some cases it can help. And now going back here. So let's try the same here. When we clone the standard openSUSE test distribution, which most of you are used to using. Then in there is the make file, and you can call make test compile change. Saying missing test requirements because it needs a copy of auth audienst, which we do have, or we can call make prepare.
Oli?
Yep.
I would assume that boot PI is not saved. Is it a problem from what you're trying to do or not?
No, because basically, well, I'm working in a different test environment anyway now. So, and I can call make test compile changed, and there was nothing changed, so that's fine. Let's assume I want to work on something, and I try out something here, and I say search screen O, and I forget the semicolon on purpose, and I call this, then, doesn't fail. Yeah. Okay. Is that valid syntax? Actually, I think it is valid syntax. That's a problem. What if I do it like this? Okay. Yeah. And now it fails. So it's immediately telling me that the syntax is not correct. Right. So short excursus on how you can shortcut feedback cycles during test development. Yeah, sorry, always reverting to Vim. This is just faster than this clicky thingies.
Can you actually click file names from the terminal to open them in the editor? In case you ever don't want to use Vim?
No, you can control click and then it does something in browser, either opens as another tab or maybe is opening the file. I don't know. Yeah. So what we can do now is, well, we could take a sneak peek into what utils normally is doing, and desktop login. I'm just looking for the needle. So it would be something like this, and then insert and click. Actually, I only need to do that. There's no need for an additional search screen. Should work, right? And then we should be able to log in. Then select console root console so that afterwards we can start openQA or something. Or we can, yeah, systemctl start open web UI.
Oliver, just a quick one. You have written the root console with underscore.
Oops. Yeah, you're right.
normally
It's a hyphen. Yeah, of course, these would be things which are syntactically correct. So we would only see that a bit later. Yeah, so what I did now is I push that. While this is ongoing, we can cross-check how it looks like in actions in the branch feature next. And didn't trigger anything. Where is the GitHub directory? I deleted some. Should be still there. Interesting. I have deleted my GitHub action. But not a problem. You can just re-trigger in here. Whenever we specify case-dir, keep in mind that if I just specify a branch, then we'll check out that branch. What you can do is there's another test variable. If you actually want to specify a specific commit that you want to check out from this standard distribution, the default distribution. This can help, is used by the openQA investigate jobs for automatic investigation to pinpoint to a specific test git commit to say, does it still work with the test state of last good? This also helps in case you want to run your product validation tests always against the fixed set. So we see that it doesn't find the openQA desktop needle because it doesn't wait long enough. I guess I got the syntax wrong on a certain click. Does it need to have an explicit timeout parameter? That could be. A certain click burgers parameter, but maybe I need to specify that.
Actually, can I ask? So I'm kind of wary here. Like, does it support all the Python tricks, like the data types? For example, if you pass asterisk args on the test API, is gonna get a hash and like the sets and things like this.
So yes, the standard data types are transformed into the equivalent in Perl, but that also means that sometimes one needs to learn, let's say, both ways. For example, now I don't actually know how I would be able to encode that if I would need to write.
Can't you just,
like
this
that.
is what I was thinking. That should work.
I would be wondering if it would work. likely you just have to pass timeout as a string.
Yeah.
I mean, in Perl, it's technically just a string, so here would be also
Oh,
just
that's
a
an
string.
interesting point. Does the binding do any conversion there?
I think it only covers some basic data types like strings in this case. But of course, if you have some fancy Perl object, it would not work. But luckily, we don't have this in the test API anyways, because it's designed to be simple. So we should not run too much into trouble.
Yeah. And then basically you can see that here that what is done is that a C function is defined with integer parameters. And what we have in Perl code is that we have that, which in Perl is a simple scalar.
It's a good example of excellent documentation where you make sure not to mention anything that you may want to know.
Yes.
There is text behind that synopsis.
Sorry, can someone who is typing on keyboard mute microphone?
And I think in this case, where we have C, the answer
Yeah,
is
it's Marius. Marius,
no,
you're typing while
not.
you're talking. Are you?
I'm not typing.
Okay, sorry. Go on.
Usually it's me, but
Felix.
but this is a
Yeah.
broader audience, so don't suspect me. So I think here it's clear that C actually defines the type to convert to because C is statically typed. I think if you have Python and Perl, well, it's a little bit more interesting actually how it will be converted. Maybe actually then Perl defines what it is. So if it's a string, it gets passed as a string. I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah.
So this is also one of the reasons why we state it is experimental. We actually need to experiment with this, gather experience especially how the typing works.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm also a little bit confused about what you've mentioned earlier, because you mentioned this environment variable to specify the Python interpreter, and it was just a path to the Python binary, but I actually was under the impression that it's using Python's C bindings from looking at the code. So I'm not entirely sure how it's actually done now.
The example which I showed you is actually for building. Okay. So I assume that it's building the correct way.
Okay. So this environment variable only needs to be there at build time of the inline module. Not at
Yes, this is why if you install the openSUSE package, which we do, then you don't have that problem anymore because the package already takes care.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, good.
This is why I'm saying it's in the responsibility of the. So here you see in the openSUSE package, we require Python 3 development packages, and then we do that here, or we build that thing. But after installation, job is done.
Yes, and likely this is also mainly used for whatever building, testing, and so on. But then it's still like I found out when investigating the code of the module that it's using the C API of Python.
Correct.
Yeah, so you don't spawn another process. It's within the same.
So maybe this was the one line where I forgot that here as well. I do this. And then it says failed, and then we just do that. Magically fix things. No, it doesn't. Yeah, yeah. I think this needs something with debus or something like that. I don't understand. But anyway, if you have an OpenSUSE environment, then this would work. So I just wanted to try out Gitpod. Actually, I also tried the Google Cloud Shell, and there we can run Docker. So what I did in there is with Docker run an OpenSUSE container, and then it looks better. Just want to try out something different here.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a surprise that cross-language dependencies are not resolved very well by language-specific package managers.
Yeah. Yeah, I would not have assumed that. Correct. Okay. Is there anything more, like ideas for the futures? Odion?
Yeah, just a quick one. How ready is our OSD and O3 infrastructure to actually start using the Python bindings already, like today, let's say?
Yeah, good point. So the inline Perl inline package is installed. There is a problem with resolving the test API Python module, so I have created one more pull request for
Yes,
auth
I've
auto-inst.
already reviewed it and you forgot to actually install the files in CMake. But if we have this, another question would be, is Python installed? Likely it is if you already installed the Perl Python inline module.
It's already used and installed for many other things within OSD, for example, for Salt.
Ah, right. Yeah, with an OSD, it shouldn't be a problem.
Right. So there was this one thing which I forgot, and that should be ready, let's say, next week on our O3 and OSD infrastructures.
Oh, and by the way, it's just testapi.py. I think the other modules like MMAPI and such are not yet converted, but they are actually just creating a simple file away from being available. But let's just stick with the core test API for now, because this is intended for simple test cases in the first place.
Exactly. And actually, you can start immediately if you just copy the 3 lines of code of test API into any Python module. So if you want to try it out, show it once more. If you want to try out a module and you copy that into your test module, then it works. And if you want to use any other Perl module in Python code, then replace that and that and that with the corresponding name. For example, you want to use MMAPI, multi-machine API, just use Perl, use MAPI, or I in dear Perl, MAPI, and so on. And then you have all these functions defined locally in your Python scope as well.
But
of course, the idea is to have benefits from the Python ecosystem and use Python modules natively. So this is just for using our internal APIs, which would otherwise not be available in Python. But otherwise, I would say you should, of course, try to do some Pythonic coding in Python.
Yep.
first of all, I would say that probably a better idea if someone will need some other module not added locally but added directly here. So there will be no duplication, and yeah, people will not start to add the same module over and over again in different places. And yeah, secondly, probably this is the main problem of all the things that use native modules works only for some, let's say, generic code. But yeah, the main problem which we have here is that we have tons of logic already done in Perl. And basically you need to redo it in Python or use this wrapper, which I don't know. Yeah, I think that we don't know yet what hit pitfalls we will face here, because it's not such kind of runtime, let's say, code execution might have a lot of hidden pitfalls.
That's correct, but I think wrapping existing code and calling that is a better approach than duplicating just for the sake of having it available in another programming language.
Yes, and maybe you need to create such files as we have for test API.py for your helpers in the test distribution as well. I mean, maybe it's still better than duplicating things, but of course, if your helpers have some complex API using blessed objects and stuff, it will likely not work. So I wouldn't recommend it for complex things.
Yeah, right. This is also my experience from the past, that a very simple function-based interface between programming languages is much better to be used than anything more complex, including objects. That
Yeah,
even includes an example where I was working on a project and there was, let's say, C++ code on both sides, but in the middle we used a very simple plain C only API to communicate, which is simpler than which in that case was simpler than trying to find a common ground for a more complicated C++ based interface. Marius, you want to say?
no, it's okay.
Do you agree?
Yes. Of course, if you have a function-based interface, if the functions have arguments or return types which are complex, or let's just say blessed objects in Perl, then yeah, that is not helping much. So yeah, you have to reduce yourself to a very basic level.
For the interface between the layers, yeah.
Well, are there any interesting examples where that's the case? Most stuff is functional anyway, right?
Well, I guess for UI frameworks, probably there's more object-oriented layers where you have some kind of code generation languages or some meta languages to define a UI and then juggle with objects.
So you're not talking about those Audience API then, I guess.
No. I mean,
Okay.
outside that scope. Okay. So that's it. Thank you all for attending that workshop. For the next workshop, actually, we do not yet have a topic. The one after that will be again the SUSE QE Tools roadmap, but the next one is the 30th of April. Do you have any wishes or recommendations? Otherwise, we will probably pick from this list. All right, then we will see about that. Thank you all for attendance, and goodbye.